Hi everyone, we were just talking about how exciting it is to be here at the first South by Southwest in London. Delighted to be here. Euan Nakul, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So,
Thanks for having us.
yeah, we're all excited. So this session is called The Age of Impatience. Before we get to that, let me just give you what the premise of Multiverse is, and you guys can correct me if I've missed anything out. It's an upskilling platform for AI and tech adoption, preparing employees for this AI-driven workforce that we are all a part of or will be entering. You guys work with over 1,500 companies globally. You hit unicorn status in 2022 with a valuation of £1.2 billion in your funding round. And you're well-funded, although loss-making currently, and you just recently completed the acquisition of Searchlight, a San Francisco-based AI business in the last year. Have I missed anything out?
Pretty good summary.
Good? Okay,
yeah,
all right,
yeah.
good. Nakul, I know you're going to talk more from the investor side.
Yep.
You and we're going to talk more about the business and AI, but give us some examples of how you're training people, just to make it a bit more tangible for people here.
So when you talk about AI, and this was one of the big kind of realizations for us, as we were already training and upskilling the workforce. The barrier, when you've had billions of investment in the foundational model layer and billions of investment in the application layer, the gap people are experiencing, and particularly companies turning the promise of AI into tangible benefits, is around adoption and how you basically get AI prevalent throughout the workforce. It is not limited to technical roles. You know, we train people like nurses and clinicians and administrative assistants in the NHS. We train people in children's services in local authorities. We train equity research analysts in big financial institutions. And we train retail store managers at large British retailers. And most of the time, it's a combination of sort of basic data literacy, prompt engineering, and then as we get deeper into organizations, more sophisticated things like deconstructing and reconstructing workflows and actually reimagining how you do work. Because AI presents an incredible opportunity, but the reason we're not yet seeing massive productivity gains from most of the economy as a result of AI is that employees haven't yet been taken on the journey. And I think one of the driving forces for Multiverse has been this: if you look at the speed with which kind of the investment and hype cycle has sort of run away on AI. If we don't get this right with the workforce very quickly, then we will leave a lot of people behind. And the threat of job displacement without massive retraining is very real. That is something that drives us massively at Multiverse, because our mission is to basically ensure that people have equal access to economic opportunity and economic output.
Anything you want to add in there, Nakul?
No, I think just the only additional thing I'd say is every aspect of knowledge work is getting touched by AI, and so retraining is required not for some specific function, some specific roles. Every single one of us in this room, including myself, has to kind of AI augment ourselves.
Yep.
Otherwise, you get left behind. The 22-year-old version of Euan is very, very AI equipped. The 22-year-old version of Nakul is using AI in ways that it's sometimes maybe harder to imagine for us. And we all, I think the great divider is going to be curiosity and motivation. And you need motivation to just embrace this new age.
Where do you both sit on that argument that knowledge work is going to go to zero and that the professional services are massively at risk?
So I think professional services, as they're comprised today, are at risk. Those traditional business models are massively at risk. Knowledge workers, I believe, will still have jobs, just the way they do their jobs will be fundamentally different, right? And they will need to be able to delegate authority to AI. They will need to be able to manage and work alongside AI agents. And the way in which people are actually, the basic menial tasks that are being done, very easy to automate out of existence, but the people who will succeed will be those who can figure out valuable work that AI can't easily do. And that's one of the things we focus on working with people on. Use this as something to augment yourself. And when you look at AI, we either end up in a situation where you have masses of job losses, or we just grow the size of the pie because every organization becomes much more productive. I mean, we have been in the West for the last 20 years in the midst of a productivity crisis, and you've had a relentless march of software tools, and yet no meaningful uplift in productivity. AI can change that. It is the single kind of biggest lever we have to pull to kind of arrest the productivity decline and get it kind of rocketing forward, but only if we take the workforce with us and only if we embed training into our workforce.
And I know so much is being invested into AI, but aren't people also saying, when are we going to see the returns? Where are the, that must be a question you get asked a lot as well.
Yeah, I think right now it's a little bit that the hype cycle is ahead of reality. I think there's a lot of hype. I think that hype is long-term accurate, and short-term it might be overhyped. And what I mean by that is, we haven't yet seen adoption happen across the board in a meaningful, tangible way, where after 3 months, 6 months of using AI, you're still using AI as aggressively at work. Yeah. Now, all of us here probably are using ChatGPT all the time, right? And so there are some use cases where that is happening. I think more on the consumer side, that's one use case that has taken off, where people are probably daily active users. So I think there's a lot of adoption-related training that needs to happen at the human level. I think the AI tools need to be more substantive and actually useful. There's some gap there, but that gap kind of allows for us to get our act together as a species, literally, right? It is I do think it'll be a massive dislocation. But it's not that knowledge work will go down to zero. It's just that potentially every person can be 10x more productive, and accordingly teams will be leaner, but there might be more number of companies. Competition might just be more because people can access. So over the last 2 decades, because of cloud, the capital needed to start a company went down dramatically. I think because of AI, the capital needed to do sales and marketing might go down dramatically. The capital needed to build engineering products or software products might go down dramatically, which means more access to everyone and many more companies. But it's not going to go to zero, in my opinion.
Do you think at Multiverse you can prepare people for those jobs that don't yet exist? Is that in your psyche?
So it's a really interesting question, because I'm actually less obsessed with trying to predict what jobs might exist. I'm more obsessed with predicting how you do your current job role better and effectively kind of augment and develop it through working differently. Because it's sort of less a fixation on job titles and more a fixation on output and usability. And we often have companies come to us, big enterprise organizations, who say, look, I've invested millions in Copilot licenses, or we've bought enterprise ChatGPT, but outside of a few people using it as a toy, it's not ubiquitous in our organization. Sometimes it's internal policies and procedures, sometimes there are legal blockers, IT blockers, integration blockers, privacy concerns, but often it is just a cultural muscle of using technology to do your job differently, right? And it's very easy for us to fall into the pattern of basically using something like OpenAI or ChatGPT as simply a search engine replacement, and not actually a way of radically changing how we do our work.
I want to come back to the UK productivity issue, because that's a really interesting one. But Nakul, I want to ask you, you've invested into Multiverse, and I've read that you've said that your advice is only useful if there is a force of nature founder at the center of the company. So what do you mean by that? And why does Euan fit that definition?
Yeah, fortunately, I find his advice really useful. So.
You have to say it. I'm going to call you a force of nature over the next 5 minutes. So my general take on this is startup success is an improbable outcome. Most startups fail. And if it's an improbable outcome, as an investor, I'm looking for people who are capable of improbable outcomes. That's a very specific phrase I'm using, because you do references on people and everybody gets to hear good things about each other, right? Like, good guy, great gal, she achieved a lot, he did this. You start asking questions about, is this person capable of improbable outcomes? That's a much more pointed question. So that's how I approach when I talk to founders, where I feel like, is this person going to do something that for the rest of the world is just going to be extremely tough and improbable? So when I met Euan, I already had a thesis that the future of education will look different than our generation. And when I was growing up, we had these revered institutions like Stanford and Oxford and IIT in India, where I grew up. And I just felt the next generation will be more about skill-based learning, They won't rever the institutions. YC is a modern Stanford in people's minds, right? So Euan already had that vision that, hey, college is broken. We need to create a next-gen program. But I think what was impressive about Euan was that not only did he have a big, expansive vision, and it was very expansive, it was about making opportunity accessible for all of humanity. He also had a very clear strategy and tactics on how he will achieve that from day zero, right? And it was like the annual plan that he had. This is what I'm going to do for the next 12 months, and then the following 12 months, and then we earn the right to do these other things. Just was extremely clear. I know we did like 5 days back-to-back Zooms. I was in Silicon Valley. He was here. And every day was just an impressive articulation of his plan. And I think he's a larger-than-life storyteller, but then he follows it up with execution and relentlessness. And just in those conversations, all of that came together, and I was like, I'm in,
And what did you think?
This is, by the way, this is really nice. I feel like I'm just getting the good stuff on my 360.
Yeah.
This is,
now, because I'm going to ask for some of the bad stuff, which is that, Nakul, you're a board member and a lead investor, and I'm sure that the board-CEO relationship can be tricky. Obviously, it has to be a tricky one. So can you share with us maybe one of the most difficult conversations you guys have ever had to have?
I think so this journey has been great. I mean, the company has had some tough days, but they've navigated in a way that, looking back, it feels like a little bit straight line up and to the right. I'm sure in the moments it didn't feel like that. When COVID happened, it was a existential moment for us, and there were other situations like that. I think the tougher conversations probably are all around people, right? So, you've had an exec team, they've done well. That's why the company is in this position. And then at some point, the company is outgrowing them faster than they are upgrading themselves. And sometimes the CEO is too close to the moment, and sometimes the board has to push him on or her on that situation. And I do recall 1 or 2 occasions where maybe we pushed Euan. And the great thing about Euan has been, for us at least, and my vantage point, is that he's been a phenomenal recruiter of really A++ people. And he brings people along on the journey, but then he's ready to see past the corner and say, hey, for where I need to go, I need to really step it up. And, so I think those conversations candidly didn't feel difficult as much as they felt like difficult going in. But when I was in the moment, I felt like Euan was not defensive. We were engaged, really.
Yeah, look, it's interesting. It takes you a bit of time as a founder to figure out exactly what your board is for. I mean, I remember early days, we'd had a great quarter, right? We'd beaten all of our targets. We'd had 3x growth kind of over the last quarter, and felt like we'd hit a bit of an inflection point. And I sort of, went to Nakul expecting a pat on the back and a celebration. This is great. And he said, Euan, why not 5x?
Yeah.
Like, come on, the market opportunity is clear. You've been doing all these things, Don't restrict yourself. And actually, it's one of the things, we've raised nearly all of our money from the US. That mentality of always demanding more and better, and the more I've got to work with the board, the more we can have really honest, frank, candid conversations with each other. We now do 2 full-day in-person board meetings a year, followed with a kind of evening before just with me and the board. And their outside-in perspective is always really useful, because you get so into your business and you know your people, and we all have biases and loyalty and people we care about for various reasons. And you've got to be able to take a detached perspective, because the reality is, if you're not constantly evolving the company, you end up with a big problem. Look, we started as an alternative to college, right? An alternative to university for a fairly small subset of the population. We then kind of morphed into, because customers, market, the opportunity, and actually the need for our mission was more in how do we upskill people in the post-industrial era who are already in the workforce, the 98.5% of the working population that is already in work. And now we're sort of moving again into how do we equip the workforce to succeed and reimagine work in the face of the AI revolution. If you can't take your company on that journey and you're so fixated on the original idea, it ends up stultifying. And by the way, the leaders that were brilliant at the start, who could wear multiple hats and do a bit of everything, are not the same ones that you need as you start to kind of build that next S-curve. And it's an interesting challenge, by the way. In Britain, we do not have enough companies that are not just unicorns, but decacorns and beyond, right? Vanishingly small number of really big companies that have been built in Britain. We don't actually have that many people who have seen the movie before, right, and can feed in that expertise. I spent a lot of time in the US and hiring talent from the US, partly because I needed to surround myself with people who knew what it was like to hit $1 billion of revenue, not just $100 million of revenue.
Yeah. Actually, it's interesting that you said that you raised, all your funding came from the States. Did you try and raise money in the UK? And also, just following on from that, is the UK a good place for scaling a business in your sector at the moment?
Okay, so on the US point, it was, this example probably demonstrates the ideological divide pretty well. When we were raising, we were just post our Series B, looking at a Series C, getting a lot of pull from the market. I would speak to British and European investors, and the conversation would normally go, look, this is great. I want to make sure you can guarantee us 3 to 5x our investment back in the next 3 to 5 years. Okay. I went over to the US. I met Mary Meeker, who led our Series C. And by the way, if you haven't read her latest 340-slide report on AI, it is well worth reading. There are tools that can summarize that for you as well. But she said to me, the first question when I went in to meet her was, Euan, how do you make this a $500 billion business? And I just thought, the fact that she would even ask that question, and that was sort of where her sights were. Yeah. She's not just trying to underwrite a decent outcome, she's trying to change the world. And that, I got that from Nakul and the folks at Lightspeed. I got that from Joel, Ken, Hemant, the folks at General Catalyst. They view the world very differently, and they look at it through a lens of what could go right. And you kind of have to do that if we want to build giant companies. And so that mentality is lacking in Britain and Europe, especially at growth stage. And on scaling capital, we are inundated with amazing early stage VCs in this country, and all the Americans are playing now at early stage here. But when you get to the growth stage, it is a bit of a funding desert, right? And again, this risk-reward ratio is sort of off, and I think that is a limiting factor for us building giant businesses. 7 of the top 10 companies were built in the last couple of decades in the US, right? In the UK and Europe, it is 3, I think, that were built in that time period, maybe less.
I think it's equally, so I do think late stage capital is missing, but equally I would encourage the UK entrepreneurial ecosystem to start thinking big in the way that you just articulated, right? There is an element of the larger than life dream, the larger than life storytelling. If you've got to $2 billion of valuation and you're selling a $7 billion vision, it's a 3.5x.
Right.
Your competition is the same week that VC will meet another entrepreneur who's selling a $50 billion vision. And I grew up in India. I think UK is similar in this way, where when I was growing up, wearing your ambition on your sleeve was seen as not grounded. People were like, what are you fucking talking about? Right? And so I grew up till most of my 20s not talking about my ambition overly. And once you get to Silicon Valley, that becomes a disadvantage to the point that you have to be able to sell your dream, and that dream better be big because the competition is selling a big dream and they're following through on it. They're relentless. And so I do think the talent is here. DeepMind was founded here. The entire AI revolution was started by DeepMind. Yeah. So the UK has the talent, right? It's a question
we're
of
not
the
very
scale
good at saying we're ambitious. We were talking about this before we came on. We do not celebrate success and say, I want to be that $500 billion business. We don't talk about it like that, and that's the problem.
That's what I'm saying. Culturally, we need to change that.
It's a thing Brits too often cringe at, or they worry that if I set that kind of goal and I fall short, I'm going to be humiliated. Yeah. It's sort of a there are so many anecdotes about this, right? Again, you're more likely to be able to raise funding in the Valley if you've had a failed business before, right? Because people feel you'd learned. Here, it counts against you, right? And so I think that is an issue. There is an interesting point as well, given the kind of age of impatience theme. There is a restlessness and an impatience that you see in a lot of the VCs and a lot of the entrepreneurs who come out of the valley that is really palpable. We do, by the way, have some of that here. We just got to kind of make sure the ecosystem's ready to support people who really want to swing for the fences.
And let me get to that theme of the age of impatience. So, you know, when I look back and you think, okay, the internet started 1995, took about 15 years for it to become really widespread, a bit longer for it to become fully transactional and viable. You know, that was a couple of decades. Why are we so impatient with AI? Why are the expectations so lofty? And also, are they overblown? You know, we had the Klarna CEO bragging about, you know, how many jobs he's cut, and now he's had to row back on that. Are we going to see more of that? Why is there this impatience?
Yeah, you go, Nakul.
So I do think like every subsequent wave of technology gets adopted faster, right? And so we were just discussing backstage, and Euan looked it up. Like ChatGPT has gone from 0 to 800 million weekly active users in the last 3 years. That's insane, right? Yeah. It is absolutely insane. And so the electricity probably took 4 decades to propagate through the world. The internet probably took 15 years. AI is potentially 3 to 5 years, right? And so they will, in that 3 to 5 year compressed period, either you prepare yourself to be on the other side of this journey, or you get left behind. So there's that impatience. Now that impatience has to be permeated across execution layers. So that impatience is about building the applications that will be part of the future for entrepreneurs. That impatience for multiverse should be that we need to be everywhere to train the employees at Goldman Sachs and Pepsi and McKinsey and Google and all these places so that they can go. So we need to be ready to meet the moment for our business. And as individuals, I think we all need to meet the moment. So I do think there is a need for an impatience because the world is going to move fast.
Yep.
And in the world of Twitter, everything spreads faster, right? Like the news spreads faster, hype goes faster. But in the world of internet, tools also get spread faster than ever before. So yeah, it's now.
And you see this, the companies that, there's such an opportunity in nearly every sector, from retail to IT to tech, financial services, healthcare, for companies to basically plant a flag of becoming AI first and take the steps to kind of get there, reimagine the way they work, kind of constitute their organizational structures. The ones that do that really quickly will win and win big, because the ability to kind of grow your enterprise value. I mean, look, Shopify is a great example of a company that's been around for quite a long time, but by reimagining itself as a kind of AI first company has managed to make it one of the sexiest companies around in a really short space of time. And you can see, look, there will be really well established, right, British companies that could go and do that right now, but you need courageous CEOs who are prepared to override objections they will face, because there are always reasons not to do something. And in Britain, we've got to be really careful of kind of structural inertia. You see it in areas of public services where we need, by the way, politicians leading from the front. It's great we got someone like Peter Kyle who's so bullish on what AI can do and the possibilities it can present. But you've also got a lot of corporate Britain that is a little stultified, right? And so they've got to be prepared to take a risk, to grab this and say, my priority, you know, I want to be able to update my shareholders in a year's time on the impact that AI has made on revenue per employee, on our output, on how our organization is constituted. Those companies that can tell that story will win big, and we want to help them do it because we'll bring the employees along with them and they'll all benefit. And it's how there is an alternative world where people just cut jobs. I much prefer to get people focused on grow the size of the pie and increase productive capacity. It's the only way, for example, we're going to overcome the scarcity of offering in public services at the moment. Massive for government, massive for businesses.
But what do you think the timeline is like for seeing those returns and seeing that productivity? I mean, in the UK, we've got a terrible 15, 20-year decline in productivity. It's not going up. When are we going to see that turn around? Because we've talked about AI and the benefits of AI for some time now, and we're still stuck where we were.
It depends on how much we want to plant a flag. And when I say we, I mean society, policymakers, businesses, to say, let's not make the mistake of the kind of post-industrial change, right, that left a lot of economies and communities behind. Let us turn the British workforce into the most AI native, tech savvy in the world. We have the density of kind of educational institutions, soft power, great stories, smart people, and a country where, you know, we can actually chart our own path. Regardless of what you think about Brexit, we do have a chance to regulate differently around this area. Now we're not in Europe, and I think that gives you an incredible opportunity to reimagine the country. We cannot do that without saying every worker, every public servant is going to have this as a goal, and it's going to be driven by a sort of coalition of forces.
So what's the timeline, do you think, when we'll see a big change?
I think depending on each function. So in engineering, we are already seeing that by the end of the year, it will be pretty ubiquitous. So one is in the 0.01% of the world, which is younger founders and startups. They are probably already 5x more productive than the rest of Silicon Valley and the rest of tech and the rest of the world. That's the 22-year-old startup that has an engineering team of all, you know, in their 20s. They're just embracing as if we embraced Google back in the day and our parents couldn't understand it, right? So I think in engineering, we are already seeing that. We are in the middle of it. It'll become ubiquitous by the end of the year. I think in marketing and some of the other content generation functions, influencers, creators, we probably are seeing some of it, and we'll see a lot more. And I think then it starts spreading function by function, right? So maybe lawyers will be more productive on documentation and other things, you know. But I think within 3 to 5 years, every single knowledge worker profession we see, CEOs will have AI chiefs of staffs. This is happening in the next 3 to 5 years, and we better prepare for it individually and, to Euan's point, society, business leaders, policymakers, and as individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you both.
Thank
Please
you.
join me in thanking Nakul and Euan.
Thank you.